Welcome back to another episode of Inside Moves. Today we're sitting down with Yash Gupta. He's worked at YouTube, Boston Consulting Group, and got a graduate business degree from Stanford. Now he's investing with Will Ventures, focused on sports, entertainment, technology, consumer, all the things that we care a lot about at JDS Sports. The main focus of today's conversation was college sports, and in particular, how we save it. I think that your background will come out in this conversation. A lot of cool things to hit on, probably that you've picked up over the years from starting at USC undergrad, an Indian immigrant, which is cool.
Yeah.
Coming to America, succeeding at USC, being at Boston Consulting Group, one of the most respected firms in the world, going to Stanford Graduate School of Business, spending time at YouTube, spending time in a bunch of different places, learning about the business of sports, now ending up at Will Ventures, investing with another really respected firm. I'm sure a lot of that will come out, but we're here today to talk about college sports. Duke basketball plays tonight. We got Champions Classic tonight. And yeah, I think the best way to start this is we're both going through probably some frustration as guys who love college sports, but are not so pumped with the product that's being put out there right now. And then talking to people that share our love for college sports that are actually frustrated and maybe turning the TV off. I think there's an argument against that too. Like, there's a lot of great things happening with the product, but maybe the best way to start is for me to say some things, kind of show where my feet are, and then see how you react. And
let's do it.
I imagine we agree, but the first thing I'd say is obvious. College sports is flipped on its head. It's going through the biggest reset it's ever gone through.
Definitely.
Amateurism is basically gone.
Yeah.
The NCAA used to be the rule writer, has less power every day.
Yeah. 100%.
The second thing I'd say is basically all of the problems that exist in today's college sports are because of the NCAA's inability to modernize and treat their athletes appropriately.
Great. And unwillingness too, really. I would add, in addition to inability.
Yeah. And unwillingness too. Like innovator's dilemma, whatever, incumbent dilemma. And then I'd say, like, a lot of the people I talk to, they say NIL ruined college sports, or the transfer portal ruined college sports. I would say these are all like pieces to a puzzle, but really, like, none of those things alone are ruining college sports. I wouldn't even say they are ruining college sports.
Yeah.
I would say that the problem with college sports is that it is now a professional league without the same kind of rule book that professional sports have.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the transfer market, whatever, contracts, there's a lot of things to unpack, but it's not NIL's fault. It's not the transfer portal's fault. There's no rule book to this new professional league. And then the last thing I'll say is, my opinion is that the path forward is writing that rule book via a CBA. I know, we're on the same page there. We're both JDS Sports and Will Ventures supporters of Jim Cavallo at Athletes.org. There's a lot more to go into, and I have a lot more thoughts, but I'll pause there and see how you want to unpack that.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I largely agree with what you're saying. I think we have an economic model that looks a lot like a professional league, right? The economic value at stake here is very, very high. And so given those reasons, you need a structure that sort of corresponds to that. And I think we're starting to get there. There's obviously, we can talk about some of the legislation that's happening in Congress. We can talk about some of the private equity firms coming in that are trying to stabilize the industry. But I think in the next 12 to 18 months, we should have a lot more clarity on what this looks like moving forward.
Yeah. So maybe the best way, even before we talk about private equity coming in or any or AO pushing for athletes' rights, maybe the best way to start is to isolate some of these things that are happening, so that, because I think the average fan knows players are getting paid now, but they don't really understand the unfolding of events And as a byproduct, I don't know that they really understand the pressures that are getting put on athletic departments to try and adapt to these things live, right? So like the first thing that I see in this like domino is the transfer portal exists.
Yeah.
That went into play in 2018, not even as a, like in 2018, that was set up so that the NCAA could better handle their transfer market with visibility. But that wasn't like, on day one of that, you couldn't just transfer and not sit out. Like the free transfer rule.
Yeah.
Exactly. So like that was a thing that was in place. Also probably as a byproduct of people being frustrated with the way that coaches and athletic departments were not letting people move freely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like that's one isolated thing that started. I guess from there, it's a combination of lawsuits or even state laws that were coming into play that were directly in contradiction with one another and the NCAA's rulebook.
Yeah.
And the NCAA is now looking at something like, I think it was the Fair Pay for Fair Play Act or something in California is like one of the good examples coming into effect in 2021. There's similar laws in different states being written that say the NCAA can't stop athletes from monetizing their name, image, and likeness.
Yeah.
And the NCAA is looking around like, dang, what do we do? Like, we have no choice, but our antitrust is going to come under question. And they kind of allow NIL payments to start happening.
Yeah. And by the way, at that point, it was also like a competitive issue for different schools, right? Where it's like, okay, you've got California with one set of rules, and so USC, UCLA, I mean, even at the high school level, like someone like a Mater Dei or a St. John Bosco has a different set of rules than someone in Georgia. And then you're seeing players transferring high schools, if you remember at the time, to like get access to NIL. And so it was like starting to like, trickle down even to the high schools. And so I think the NCAA had to come in and be like, all right, we're going to allow this to happen. There's got to be some sort of standardization. I don't think they sort of expected it to like snowball as quickly as it ended up happening.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So then now it's like, say 2021, the NCAA is having this like introspective moment where they realize they're in trouble. If they try and enforce the rules that they've been enforcing for decades, they're going to end up in court and they're going to lose. So then they say, okay, athletes are able to monetize their selves in the way of any other professional athlete endorsements.
Yeah.
What happened is it didn't say you can essentially pay directly to the athletes from the schools the way that pros are paid for their labor. But that's effectively what happened via NIL collectives, and chaos ensued. Similarly, the transfer portal could not any longer have their rule about limiting your ability to freely move as an athlete. It used to be where you have to sit out a year, and it was hard to just bounce around schools. The NCAA also looked at that and was like, if we try and enforce this, it's the same thing. Our power is going to be contested in courts. We're just going to let this happen. Completely separate issue to pay for play revenue sharing, which comes later, but is kind of the chaos that the average fan, I think, is like familiar with and sees in the product. Am I right?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that part of it, like, it needed to happen because the NCAA knew that they couldn't control it. I think how quickly following that, like, teams took advantage of it and athletes took advantage of it was jarring, right?
Yeah.
And like, as a USC fan, I benefited. Lincoln Riley came over immediately. Caleb Williams comes over, Jordan Addison comes over. You take a team that like was in a complete rebuilding mode, and then all of a sudden they're potentially going to the playoffs, and so like for fans, it was like both a positive and a negative, I would say, because it allowed for that competitive nature to improve like very, very quickly. But to your earlier point, like the players that you were used to seeing, the players maybe that like you had nurtured for 2 or 3 years were now leaving your programs. Like, it took away that like connection that people had with the universities and their college athletic departments, and made it feel a lot more professional much more quickly.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, as a former college athlete, I thought about the teams that I was a part of, and how they were special because of the 4 years we got together.
Definitely. Yeah.
I wanted to transfer from Duke as a freshman. I didn't do it because if I, got homesick and wanted to go home to Rutgers, I would have lost my sophomore year of eligibility, would have sit out, and then who knows what happens in 18 months from then.
Yeah.
So I didn't do it, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Does that mean that there aren't kids with needs to move and that they should be looked at and adapted to? No, like everybody's got a different story, but combining the transfer portal and the free moving of it, no rules, free market, with now we have these NIL collectives that are essentially just donors who are saying, I used to donate money to the athletic department to fund your facilities, to fund, the coaches' recruiting trips, etc.
Coaches' buyouts.
Yeah. I used to fund those things, but now you're telling me that the best way to attract talent is to directly pay them in marketing deals. Well, then they were just going to make up marketing deals. And you have this like chaos every year is free agency, which is the frustration, I think, with college sports from a fan's perspective, from a coach's perspective, and even for the players. The lack of rules is not good.
No. Yeah, I mean, it misaligns incentives, right? Because if your team is up for a bowl game, it might not be a college football playoff game, but it's a meaningful bowl game, and you know that you want to get a better contract for next year, you're probably going to sit that out because you don't want to get injured for what you view as a meaningless game, right? So it hurts the players, it hurts the fans, it hurts the schools that are having to focus on like roster retention in addition to sort of roster construction. So yeah, and like the role of collectives was very different at each school as well. Like some schools were a bit more above board, I guess you could say, where it was true NIL the way NIL was intended, which is, okay, you get a brand that wants to work with an athlete, maybe in the local community, and there is a bit more of like a direct endorsement type relationship. And then you had a lot of collectives that were effectively just, pay to play. And it was extremely hard at that point to sort of regulate and like figure out what was real and what was not.
Yeah, I think I saw a statistic that I'm going to butcher the number of like total value that went through NIL collectives on like an annual basis over the last however many years, but it's a big number.
Yeah.
Like either I think it was a 9-figure number, and I think less than 5% of it was like analyst says, who knows, but less than 5% of it was actually true marketing dollar.
Yeah, marketing dollars.
True sponsorship with like true, I guess obligation from the athlete to promote some kind of legitimate brand, and fairly market valued, right?
Yeah.
So like it's really just a way for donors to get money into the pockets of the athletes they want to come to their school. And then the other statistic I saw was that less than 1% of NIL deals were investigated by the NCAA.
Yeah.
So the NCAA is basically saying it's chaos and like we're incapable of monitoring this.
Yeah.
They're making efforts to do that now. But that is the Wild West of college sports since 2021.
Yeah. I think the last thing I would add to that, like in terms of what everything that's happened that we've gotten to today, was like realignment as well. Like all these conversations around realignment, the SEC expanding, the Big Ten expanding, the demise of the Pac-12, like all of this was sort of happening at the same time as well. And like there was rumors of it, and then obviously it ended up happening a couple of years later. And I think that like that just added as a fan to like the instability, right? Because okay, you're starting to lose players that you rooted for, that you loved and you respected. Now all of a sudden you're losing rivalries as well. And so it felt like the whole ecosystem, as we knew it as fans, was changing, right?
Yeah.
Like from a player, from a team, from a just general like relationship perspective across the ecosystem. So all that kind of happened really within like a 3 or 4 year time span at the same time.
Yeah. And I think there's like an important distinction to make here too, that everything we just talked about has created professional challenges for the people operating athletic departments.
Yeah.
How do I create a championship level team?
Yeah.
How do I engage with my fans?
Yeah.
Et cetera? How do I run an athletic department? Like became a major challenge for these people.
Yeah.
It created chaos for the athletes. But we haven't even really gotten into the potential attack, the biggest potential attack vector for athletic departments in the future of college sports, which is now all of a sudden there's revenue sharing.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a surprise new line item, new operational cost.
Yeah.
That if you want to compete at the highest level, you have to begin paying.
Fully fund it. Yeah.
Right. And like that is distinct from everything we just talked about. And the things that people have gotten familiarized and associated with college sports is kind of actually a thing in the past. The big problem that's facing these athletic departments now, yes, they still have to deal with all this chaos with players moving around. How do we retain them? How do we recruit them? How do we engage with fans? But now also, how do we pay our budget?
Yeah.
That just got $20 million bigger in the wake of the House versus the NCAA settlement. Yeah.
Yeah, and that number is going to only grow, right? So you mentioned it's 20.5 today. It'll grow like 4% or 5% year over year. You got to figure out how you're going to allocate that across sports. You got to figure out how do you allocate that across players. You'll still have collectives, by the way, playing in this ecosystem in terms of being able to offer like true NIL. And so you still need to figure out how you raise those dollars as schools and collectives, because if everyone is able to sort of pay the cap, and then you still need to find like a competitive differentiator. So, and a lot of these schools had other challenges, right? Like just budget challenges that they were already facing, whether it's capital projects around facilities, whether it's loss of academic funding. Like there was significant challenges that these schools are now facing beyond just the athletic departments as well. And to your point, now you're adding, more than $20 million a year of unexpected costs and potential back pay as well. So yeah, it's a really tough time for college athletic departments to sort of manage their budgets and figure it out moving forward.
Yeah. So like what's going to happen? Let's talk in the short term. Like what's the downside risk that we have that we're facing in college sports? And like, let's just say this, the House versus NCAA settlement. What was that? I think a lot of people were associated with NIL. It's actually kind of separate.
Yeah.
It's a lawsuit that said that because the NCAA was in antitrust violation for decades, they did over $2 billion in damages to athletes.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor. Unanimously in favor of House and House versus NCAA. Said you need to back pay all these athletes.
Yeah.
$2.8 billion.
Yeah.
And now going forward, kind of demanding a go forward plan so that you are fairly compensating your athletes. As a result, rather than NIL payments, there is a $20 million, up to $20 million, you can opt in, ability to pay your athletes directly off, the P&L of an athletic department.
Yeah.
So that's where we are now. And that's going to create instability.
Definitely.
Right? So what's the downside risk?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of downside risks here, right? So I think the first and the thing I see as a fan, not just of college football and college basketball and women's college basketball, is that the non-revenue generating sports are going to see a hit here. Things like Title IX will help with some protections, but we're already seeing it, right? Where if you're a sort of middle tier athletic department and you know that you want to compete in the revenue generating sports and sort of fully fund that $20.5 million, you might have to cut sports in order to help fund that. And so just as a fan of the Olympic sports, that's a really tough challenge.
Yeah, as a guy who played baseball, like scary. It's very scary. Yeah.
And it was already happening with NIL where like the distribution of dollars was like inequitable. It's going to, I feel like, increase even more so now with the House settlement. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is the way that House has sort of been proposed, and it hasn't been codified yet, but like it doesn't really solve a lot of the structural issues. There is still going to be a lot of, as I mentioned, like NIL involvement with collectives. There will still sort of be a lot of like head-to-head recruiting battles where, these things can sort of maybe get out of control. And you're seeing like more under the table payments because you need to sort of attract the quarterback to come to your university. There is still not like too much in there around transfer rights, player protections, the back pay itself, and figuring out how schools will sort of pay for those things. So it like answers some questions, but it creates like a whole new set of questions for these universities as well.
Yeah, a whole new set of questions. Do you think that the NIL collectives? It seemed like as investors, you're paying attention to like who's building new stuff for what, right? And there was kind of like a rush to like,
Yeah.
let's build stuff to solve problems for these NIL collectives. And it was clearly a focus in athletic departments to set them up. And if you don't set them up, talk to the donors that are setting them up, support them, and find ways to get money in the pockets of athletes. Now, rather than these marketing deals being the sole source of capital to recruit, there's this $20 million. Before we even talk about how they were going to pay that, do you think that it's going to change the focus or the prioritization inside athletic departments around these NIL collectives? Do they go to the side, or is it even more growth there or focus, I would say?
I think a little bit of both. So, and I think it kind of depends on like which types of universities you're talking about, right? So if you're a tier 1 university, like an Ohio State or a Michigan, or in my view, a USC,
Right.
and like you're going to fully fund that, $20.5 million in year one. You're going to figure out your split across sort of the sport and how you want to do it. You're probably, for those schools that I mentioned, for Duke and USC, for example, it's different, right? Duke's probably allocating way more for men's basketball than USC is, and then USC is probably allocating way more for football. But so figuring that all out is sort of one priority. Where the collectives come in is, anything above the 20.5, and if you want to sort of get a talented player and you need to sort of construct an entire roster, you still need to find a way to pay that player, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so collectives will need to do true NIL, like when, to your earlier point, bringing like actual brand and sponsorship deals to them. And I think like collectives honestly will look a lot like agencies and that matter, where they will have to sort of work with brands and local partners to facilitate some of those things. And if you're a 5-star football or basketball recruit and you want to go to Duke, there's an amount of money that Duke will pay you directly, and then the Duke collective will sort of bring true sponsors to you for a real endorsement deal.
Gotcha.
And so I think the collective use case will still be important and will be there, but I think it'll be like more sort of siloed in terms of things they're focused on.
So this has always like thrown me for a loop. Like essentially that's what they are, right? They're just kind of agencies.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
So like, what does the ecosystem actually look like? If I'm a 5-star recruit and Duke says, hey, now we have this, $20 million we're allowed to use for salaries. We're going to give you $1 million to come here. And then, our NIL collective has these deals lined up where we can guarantee you another $500,000 on top if you do these engagements, whatever it might be. But I'm a 5-star recruit and maybe I'm represented by CAA. Like this just sounds hairy. Like how do these things get managed and how do they flow? Like it always throws me for a loop trying to like my brain likes to work in black and whites and concretes. And I'm like, this is a messy network.
It's a very messy network. I mean, to your point around agencies and my point around it being like it is an agency, you've got different agencies already involved in the ecosystem. So like, as you mentioned, the players now are getting repped by these big agencies. You've got the coaches that are repped by agencies as well. Might be a different one, might be the same one. You've got brands that might also be repped by an agency, which again could be the same one or the different ones. And then you've got the collectives that are acting like agencies that are trying to sort of formulate all of this. And in the middle, you also have some really interesting businesses that are like being started that sort of help with some of this. Like as an example, we're investors in a business called FanStake. And I think this is where technologies can be really helpful, right? So like, can you facilitate these introductions, these payments in a more seamless way? And like what FanStake does is for true NIL, sort of if house is codified and these payments start, for true NIL, they'll work with collectives on finding brand deals, getting them, they're officially accredited by the NCAA. So they'll get those deals to the players and they can sort of manage all the risk and the approvals and stuff needed for that as well. So as an investor, I see a lot of opportunity in a platform like FanStake to facilitate some of that. A lot of the sort of like hand-to-hand combat that will occur between the agents and the schools and how much each player gets paid. That is very much like not black and white.
Yeah. Is that, I guess that's the other thing that I've learned. We have Slam in JDS, and we do a lot of this, talent relations, athletes on the cover that they end up on a t-shirt. And you have to do a lot of this mapping, like who are the stakeholders, who do we talk to, how do we get the rights to go monetize an athlete in their jersey with them, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I've learned between the NBA and college is, in the NBA, it's not necessarily uniform between athlete and team and whatever, but like it's pretty similar. If you want to get something done, you go to the league, you go to the Players Association, you go to that player's agent, you get the sign off on this, you have the rights for that. And then, not that you can just rinse and repeat, but it's 30 controlled teams with a rule book for a lot of how they handle rights.
Yeah.
The college space is, even before all of this chaos got thrown into it, was already more fragmented and
There's
difficult
no
to figure out. There's no standardization. Yeah.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, it's like, it feels very much at this point, given all the changes, like it's a professional ecosystem, right? You've got billions of dollars in media rights. You've got multimedia rights for sponsorships for each of these schools that are really, really hefty. And so you've got a lot of revenue that feels like a professional entity.
Yeah.
But then the stability of it relative to a Big Four sports league is like very minimal, right? You don't have stability around players. You don't have stability around conferences and teams. There's a lot of instability in the ecosystem right now around fundraising and how much economic stability there is from the broader universities and funding these athletic departments. And you could invest a bunch of money in a player, and then that player leaves the next year. Like, there's no sort of standardized contracts or protections in there for the player or for the university. And so the lack of structural elements, I think, is very, very clear, especially now that the economic value and the risk that these athletic departments are taking is so high as well.
Yeah. 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 So let's talk a little bit about the path forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we agree, right, that this is in large part, if not solely, due to a lot of the shortcomings of the NCAA. There's chaos, and there's also economic risk to these athletic departments and the future stability of college sports as a whole. I don't think people are crazy for seeing something like the SAFE Act in Congress at face value and saying, well, if we just give the NCAA carte blanche, that puts a Band-Aid on this, and they can go back to writing rules and enforcing them. At face value, you see all these problems and you're like, we need to do something.
Yeah.
Adam Brenneman, friend of ours, you're going to talk to him tomorrow, had on the House of Representatives member from South Carolina.
Yep.
What's his name? I'm blanking on it. I think Fry might be his last name.
Yeah.
And they had a conversation. Fry is a supporter of the SAFE Act, which is essentially a motion that started in the Senate. Ted Cruz is leading it, to grant the NCAA antitrust law exemption.
Yeah.
These issues are stemming from the NCAA afraid to write and enforce rules because they don't actually have a leg to stand on based on antitrust law.
Yeah.
And then if the NCAA doesn't have to abide by antitrust law, then in some ways we can go back to the old world.
Yeah.
I understand why Adam Brenneman had him on. I love Adam. Adam is as smart as they come. He's doing a lot of great things. In that conversation, I don't think that they went deep enough into the problems with that path forward.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear you kind of break that down and explain why that's not the path forward.
Yeah. I mean, candidly, I think that plan and the way it's been sort of proposed is very, very beneficial for the NCAA and the universities, because it prevents them from getting sued. It like doesn't classify college athletes as employees and doesn't give them certain protections. It like, I think it even limits like transfers to one time without losing eligibility. And so it very much feels like, okay, we're bringing stability into the ecosystem, but with a lens from, okay, we're building stability into the system for colleges and for the NCAA.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't really protect athletes in any way. And I think any solution that we sort of come to as an industry needs to start with the athletes.
Yeah.
You even look at like realignment, for example, and that benefited the universities, right? But like, was anyone really talking to the athletes about this? Our friend Jim at athletes.org, like I think has mentioned this before as well, like no one was really hearing the voice of the college athletes. Like, do I want to go cross country to play my games? Like, what does that mean if I'm truly a student and I want to get a degree? Like, the voice of the student athletes is very much lost in this. And I think that proposal is just another example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a statistic that the West Coast teams that joined East Coast conferences, so USC,
Yeah.
UCLA,
Yeah.
Oregon,
Washington.
Yeah. If you look at the flight logs of individual sports in one season, they will have traveled like, I'm going to butcher the number, but it was like tens of thousands of miles that you are going to be traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast to compete, all while trying to get a degree at a school like USC or Oregon. Like, that's not easy to do.
Easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody ever asked the athlete, can you do that? Right.
Yeah.
And the NCAA's pushed back on it with saying, we have things in place like SAC, Student Athlete Advisory Committee, where, they hold focus groups and they talk to them. But if you open up what those things are, I had friends that were on those committees. There were opportunities to go put something nice on your resume.
Yeah.
Maybe they would inform you a bit, but like there was no, you can say they had a voice. Maybe they had some level of a voice, but they didn't have a vote, right?
Yeah.
There was no vote for, hey, you can't make us fly all this time while expecting me to be a pre-med student, or an engineer, right? Like the NCAA says that they are for the student athlete experience, but that doesn't really look true when you look at conference realignment, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think like what I worry about as a fan of the game, as someone who like wants to support student athletes, is like this next big change of college sports. College realignment was one of them, or conference realignment was one of them. It's like, will the voices of the athletes be heard this time, right? And I know we'll talk more about this later, but like I think the only way that happens is if they have a seat at the table. The only way they get a seat at the table is through some sort of collective bargaining.
Right.
And I think like that is critical, like not just for the athletes, but I actually think it's critical for the universities and the NCAA and whatever the governing body looks like in the future. Because if your product, which is these student athletes and like how amazing they are at what they do, if they are unsatisfied with the construct and they don't have a voice, it might not blow up right now, but it will blow up eventually. So it is much, and that's the reason why all the major sports leagues have, players associations, they have CBAs in place. And I think that's what college needs. Yeah,
it's definitely what college needs. Jim said it really well. I heard him speaking, actually, I think it was a debate where somebody was arguing the side of the NCAA's antitrust law exemption. He's saying, so we want to grant a serial antitrust law violator carte blanche in rulemaking going forward, and to point out that all of the issues that exist today are their inability to address and evolve with the times.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially the NCAA price fixed labor in their industry at zero for all of its existence.
Yeah.
They got away with it. And, ultimately what it comes down to is we have the problem where there aren't rules and we need a system for making rules.
Yep.
And we don't want to grant the NCAA unilateral decision-making for this because they've already messed it up a bunch, right? That's kind of what it boils down to, in my opinion. So then you have to ask, well, what's our alternative?
Yeah.
The alternative is the collective bargaining agreement where you write a rule book, both sides get to negotiate, and then lawsuits won't follow because these are agreed upon.
And like if you're a university, the House settlement happens, $20.5 million that you have to now pay if you want to be competitive in these sports. there's a CBA in place. Your costs are controlled. You know what you're gonna bring in. You know how much of that you're gonna have to pay out. You know if you're a college athletic director or a college GM or a head coach, okay, this is what my roster can look like. I can maybe give out multi-year contracts. I can set salary caps and floors. Like, it's better for everyone involved. I think the reason it's not happening is because of the NCAA. Because, I mean, I think the NCAA realizes that they have screwed up this entire situation, and they're losing power day in and day out. The conferences are gaining power, individual institutions are gaining power, and then players will gain power. And so they're afraid. And I personally believe like the NCAA shouldn't. If you ask me like 5-10 years from now, like what role is the NCAA playing? In my ideal world, it's really not playing as big of a role, right? Maybe they are, they are operating some of the events and the tournaments. Have done a great job of that with the, men's and women's basketball tournament, for example. Maybe there's some sort of involvement with the Olympic sports, given sort of the history of the NCAA in terms of like running these types of events. But for college football, college basketball, like I really think it's got to be some sort of new entity that sort of takes this forward.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You bring up private equity.
Yeah.
You hone in on the $20 million that has to get paid. Like what's the first shoe to drop? Like, how do we actually take a step forward and get out of this, what seems like, just horrible place that we've been for a couple of years? People say it a lot, like private equity is coming for private sport to college sports. Like, what does that mean to you? And like, how does that start to happen? And why is that potentially good? Because to me, I come from a family of doctors.
Yeah.
And I also work in private equity. And I see a lot of public scrutiny, like, oh, private equity gets into hospitals, and then they start, right? And like, there's truth to, certain industries becoming very bottom line oriented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Problems happen, and then they need to be paid attention to and fixed. And people don't always associate private equity with good for your industry, right? So, but I think that private equity probably is core to the path forward.
Yeah.
But like, when you hear private equity in college sports, what do you think, and how do we actually start progressing in a path that helps?
Look, I think in an ideal world, if like the NCAA had done their job, private equity wouldn't be needed, right? But I think we're at a moment now where private equity is needed, primarily just given the cost and the economic structures that are taking place.
So because
today.
of the $20 million that athletic departments need to pay, rather than cutting Olympic sports, you think private equity is a viable option?
And it's not just the $20 million. It's like, how is that number growing? How a lot of these athletic departments are already running in deficits with like these major capital projects, which, by the way, they've needed to do to compete with other schools that are doing that. There is like the open question around sort of, our athletes, our college athletes, employees, and like there's just a lot of instability in the ecosystem, as we've talked about in this conversation. I think private equity is a shoe to drop, but I don't think it's like the first shoe to drop necessarily that like solves everything. I think the reason we're seeing college athletics makes a ton of sense for private equity for a lot of reasons, right? Like, if you can control sort of like the collective bargaining side of things, which, by the way, I think like the private equity institutions will want that to happen as well, because that is like that would become their biggest sort of like cost line item.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of makings of a very attractive business, right? You've got contractually guaranteed revenues through media rights, through sponsorship deals. There's a reason why, like in the Big Ten enterprises deal that's being contemplated right now with the California pension, there's a reason why in that it would be an extension of the Bill of Rights for the Big Ten, right? Where like the member institutions have to stay on for an extra 10 years beyond what they have today. Like, stability is what private equity looks for, and I think college has a lot of instability today, but like has the makings of being a very like stable ecosystem.
Yeah, let's go deeper on that, because I remember when the PE dollars coming for college sports conversations first started happening, and my knee-jerk reaction is, oh, is that an opportunity for JDS Sports? Let's go look at athletic departments that are fun and exciting. And then 30 seconds later, I'm like, these places are chaotic. Yes, of course, that's sometimes opportunity, but where is the growth? Dig deeper and you find those answers and come to the light. But like, how have you done that analysis, and why do you actually believe that this is an investable opportunity
Yeah.
for different investors, despite the fact that, there's a bunch of trouble ahead?
Yeah, I think it depends on like where you're injecting capital into the ecosystem and at what
A
level you're
great
doing
point.
that,
Yeah.
right? So like at the school level, I'm personally more bearish on it
Yeah.
because at the school level, you control certain things, right? You can control what you're doing in your stadium if you have, some sort of rev share there. You can, control your apparel deal and some of your school sponsorship deals. Like that's what you could control, your ticketing, things like that. You can't control your media rights deals, right? Unless you're like Notre Dame and you're independent. Like
Yeah.
everything else is sort of being dictated for you by the conferences. And so I think putting private equity to work at the school level is tough. Some of the schools that are in, precarious situations might still take private equity, or they might take some sort of like debt facility to sort of to figure it out. So there might be some different constructs there. I think the conference level is better, but I still don't think it solves all the issues. So like again, the Big Ten Enterprises deal right now, which for people watching, is being pushed back pretty heavily from Michigan and USC. It feels like the other member institutions are on board. That would be, I think it's like a $2.4 billion deal for roughly 10% of Big Ten Enterprises. What that would do is like set aside, create a new entity called Big Ten Enterprises that would have all of the sort of like Big Ten revenue rights effectively, right? Their media rights, their sponsorship rights, things like that. And in exchange, those schools would get a one-time $2.4 billion cash infusions and then split amongst sort of the 18 schools. And so each school is getting, $100 to $180 million, depending on the tier of school that you fall into, which is an awesome sort of one-time capital infusion. If you're like USC, you're building a new facility, or you have to pay a buyout if you're Penn State. Like it does sort of really help in the short term. There still is, I would say, like limited upside though, in terms of like true revenue generation at the conference level.
Yeah.
Because your media rights are locked in for the next several years. You can play with sponsorship packages, but it almost kind of goes back to the school level because a lot of those are like hyper localized anyways. And so in my view, I think where private equity should play is at a step up even above conferences, which is like, can you create basically a new NCAA, right?
Yeah.
And like one entity that controls all of college sports, including the college football playoff, including the men's and women's March Madness tournaments, and including Olympic sports as well. And can private equity capitalize that entity? And then you kind of pool everything together, right? And then you do see some synergies on the revenue side as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the best argument and the biggest opportunity. If you want to like forecast out what the SEC's media value is at their next deal, or the Big Ten's at their next deal, like there will be some step up.
Definitely.
But, if they were to combine, then it would probably be a larger pie for both of them. That was like a concept that was relatively unfamiliar to me until the last couple of years. And you look at history, it actually supports this. The NFL did this, right? Where they used to have two separate leagues. The revenue was not shared from the media deal in the way that it is today. It was all regional sports networks.
Yeah.
And you were controlling your own rights. The New York Giants were major benefactors of that. It gave them a competitive advantage if they were, against whoever else, Cleveland, or I don't know if Cleveland existed yet, but whoever else it was, the small fish. Instead, they combined everyone's media rights.
Yeah.
They did a revenue sharing model where everybody got paid equally on these national rights.
Yeah.
And the overall pie grew.
Yeah.
So maybe the Giants' sliver of that pie was smaller than what they were doing alone, because now they were also subsidizing the group. But what it did was provide long-term stability.
Definitely. And there's a reason why like that same model that you've sort of described is like, the NBA, the MLB, NHL don't have that. They still sort of have relied on more of a regional model, but they've increasingly tried to get as much more as much national as they can,
right?
And even like consolidate these rights again.
Yeah. And what I saw was that this step up in total pie actually might be as big as 1.5 to 2.5 to 3x
Yeah.
for total revenue from media rights if you were simply to consolidate.
Yeah.
So now it starts to make sense where, okay, if we're going to double revenue, there is room for investment dollars today and revenue sharing in the future with private equity.
100%.
That makes sense, even with new costs. You can do that math equation. I think it's like 22% of like current Division I top line revenue will now be paid to athletes. So that's a big portion. But if we're talking now about a 2 or 3x jump, if we consolidate the rights, it starts to make sense. I think the question is, though, college sports is unique because there's 100 and however many Division I teams, like football teams. I think there's like 140 or something. Something like that.
Yeah.
Even more basketball and Olympic sports. And there's Olympic sports. It's not just football, which is driving all the revenue. The contra example to the NFL is actually what happened in the English Premier League in, I think it was the 90s.
Yeah.
Where rather than the top dog saying, we'll consolidate the rights and share in revenue with everyone, the top dogs broke off and said, we're going to start our own thing.
Yeah.
And that succeeded as the English Premier League. So I'm getting the names wrong, but it's basically the opposite. And, I think consolidation is going to happen.
Yeah.
My question is ultimately, and we don't have the answer to this, but it's Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, whoever. The big players are going to have to sit around in a room and say, how big are we going?
Yeah.
Who comes with us?
Yeah.
And what are we going to subsidize for the sake of the future of college sports?
Yeah.
Which is tricky.
Yeah. It's very tricky. I think this is also where I think it's really important to have the athlete voice involved, right? Because if you're the ADs of Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, USC, UCLA, like you can't be having this conversation without athletes being involved.
Yeah.
And I think like those schools can go, create a super league or whatever is the right term. They would probably be better off individually in terms of like their top line, but the ecosystem I think would suffer. And I actually think in the long term it would hurt them as well. Like in the next 3 to 5 years, it would probably help them. But in terms of like the growth of the game, the stability of the ecosystem, the satisfaction from fans, like all of that would take a major hit in a Super League situation. And so I think something like you described in sort of European soccer, that I think is the wrong way for us to sort of move as an industry.
Yeah.
Despite sort of the short-term benefits for some of these bigger schools.
Yeah, I think the challenge too is that, I use the New York Giants as my example. The Giants had an ownership group that was looking at, their lifetime as the owner of the New York Giants and a member of the National Football League. Whereas there's an athletic director at all these SEC and Big Ten schools. Most of them are very intelligent people, but the life cycle of their career and whatnot is a little bit different of a equation.
Yeah, definitely.
And, you hope that, I would imagine all of them are like us. They love college sports. That's why they're in it,
Totally.
But incentives rule the world. So it's tricky. I think we're going to start to find out soon. What do you think the timeline is for some of these things to start appearing? And I guess in the Big Ten, it's starting to happen. But I agree with you. I don't think that Big Ten deal is what makes the most sense. I think it's a super league or like a, NCAA level consolidation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in terms of timing, like there's a lot of different ways that this can go, right? So I think there's like the legislation side of things as well. And whether it's the SCORE Act or the SAFE Act or any of these other like pieces of legislation that may sort of actually be presented in Congress, like it'll obviously have to get through Congress, which will be, there'll be a whole political debate around that as well. What happens with the legislation, I think particularly around a couple key things. One, the like antitrust exemption for the NCAA. One of the proposals called for this like model around like pooling media rights. And so what does that mean for like the revenue that can be generated? Are athletes employees or contractors? What does like NIL look like outside of like there's a lot of these open questions that the legislation may help solve, which I think will flow down to sort of like the economic impact to the schools.
Yep.
And so legislation is one thing that could happen, or it could just never happen, right? Because
Right.
of how slowly things may move. Um, and so I think the other first shoe to drop could be more on the private equity side. And I think that is just going to probably happen at a conference level.
Mhm.
The Big Ten's had these conversations. The Big 12 has had these conversations. Obviously, a bunch of individual institutions have as well. But I think it's just going to take a lot of coordination required to get the Big Ten and the SEC and the Big 12 and whatever's left of the Pac-12 and Notre Dame, which operates independently, all on the same page. Like that's not going to happen overnight. And so I think we're a ways away from sort of like a new entity being formed.
Mhm.
It's a little bit chicken and the egg, right? It's like how do you sort of get these universities and these conferences on board for a new construct? I think this is where it's going to take like enterprising athletic director at one of these top universities, or a really like thoughtful and forward-thinking private equity firm that thinks that they can put forward a proposal that sort of works for all parties involved.
Yeah, it's tricky because my take is that it'll probably the ones most likely to feel the pains of the current economic situation are not the ones with the most sway.
Definitely.
Right. So, if you're in the bottom of the Big Ten, if you're Rutgers, I love Rutgers. They're in a tough spot right now. They're in a ton of debt. They're trying to compete at the next level in the Big Ten, and they need to start paying their athletes. They're in a tough spot. There will be these scenarios in the Big Ten and the SEC, but it's more like the ACC, the Big 12, and then everybody that's right beneath them that's also giving us exciting sports,
Definitely.
but really going to struggle to compete in a world where you have to pay your athletes. Those are the teams that would be jumping to find a solution.
Yeah.
Whereas, the big dogs have less of a sense of urgency.
Motivation.
Yeah. Less of an incentive to move today. I think that it'll take, like you said, a very forward-thinking, aggressive capital source. And it'll take a maverick. It'll take somebody who is a thought leader, who gets the biggest athletic departments within the conferences together, and says this is the path forward. And I think it also helps that the public discourse is increasingly talking like you and I.
Totally.
It's only gone in one way. I actually have there's I won't speak in absolutes, but I don't think the SAFE Act is getting through Congress. I don't think anybody's rushing to say the NCAA, you have all your powers back.
No.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening. And I am hearing more and more collective bargaining agreement from athletic directors, conference heads, coaches, athletes, more and more every day coming out and saying that is the path forward. We need a rule book. This is how we write it.
Definitely. And like to your point around incentives, it's even within the same conferences, right? You do have misaligned incentives. To your point around Rutgers, like same conference as Michigan and Ohio State. Like it's just a different it's a different ball game for them. And so this is where like I think those top institutions would love to sort of have independence and like make their own decisions. They are tied to the Big Ten and the SEC in these in certain situations, and so I'm in some ways thankful that sort of the realignment happened a couple of years ago, and there is sort of like economic structures in place a little bit to prevent some of these schools from going out and breaking away, because I do think it would hurt this maybe smaller institutions at some of these conferences as well.
While on the topic, I do want to get your thoughts on this as well. I saw today, and I don't know how recent this was, but a U.S. senator calling for investigation into the nonprofit status of colleges and their athletic departments, if private equity starts investing in them,
Yeah.
it becomes even more in question. I don't have a really strong opinion on this. I think it's this thing that's kind of floating around
Yeah.
in the conversation that um, isn't being directly addressed a ton. Do you have an opinion on whether or not that their nonprofit status should be altered, and like what would the implications of that actually be?
Yeah. First of all, I'm definitely not an expert on
Yeah,
this, and I think it like goes way beyond athletics, right? Because
yeah,
this goes to like government funding and hospital systems, which by the way are like even bigger revenue drivers for these universities than
yeah,
their athletic departments are.
yeah,
So I think like I mean, in a really wild world, maybe there's a world in which like you spin out the athletic departments outside of the like university ecosystem,
right,
and those are not nonprofits, but the rest of the universities are, because I think you need them to be nonprofits for for academic funding, for the hospital side of things, for grants and things of that nature. Um, I mean, you've got OpenAI that was a nonprofit,
right.
right? And it
Yeah, Sam
raised
Altman can be.
billions of dollars of capital. So I think yeah, I mean it's probably a little bit more semantics than not, but yeah, we'll let Sam Altman figure out
Yeah, well,
how the universities.
college sports will call Sam Altman to. I think Sam Altman would be a better than Trump. I think Trump's trying to save college sports, and we'll call Sam Altman first.
Sam's also spending a lot of time in the White House these days.
He
Yeah,
is spending a lot of time in the White House. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So I think we're clearly pretty aligned on how things look, where they might be going. What we haven't talked a ton about is, I don't think either of us are working for places that are going to write, $1 billion or $500 million checks to start the new league. I mean, maybe there's a way for each of us to professionally participate
yeah,
in the future in that sense.
yeah,
But we are both working at investment firms that are focused on sports.
yeah, yeah.
So what are you seeing out there that is a new opportunity? Or like what have you invested in the
Yeah,
past that is being now impacted? How is like your investor cap changed
Yeah.
with college sports?
Yeah, I mean, as an investor, it's a really interesting time because like the instability usually drives changes and structural changes, which creates like opportunity for investment, right? So
Yep.
we've looked at it from a few different ways. There's athletes out of work. We think that like there needs to be an entity that sort of stabilizes that, stabilizes the entire sort of structure of college sports. I mentioned Fansync earlier. We think like software is a much better facilitator of some of these transactions.
Yep.
It's much more open. It's easier to track. It sort of reduces the burden on both athletic departments and collectives as well as brands. So Fansync's like a great example of a really strong founding team, very strong technical team that's built Silicon Valley products, now building for sort of the college space. One space that I think is really interesting is insurance. So as the economic value at stake here is like getting extremely high, the risk for the universities is also getting very high. So we're investors in a company called Players Health,
Okay.
which is starting to do a lot now in the college space. They'll do things like fraud, risk protection, NIL insurance and protection now, injury protection. Now with the transfer portal, they're doing transfer protection as well. So if you pay, a bunch of money for a player in year one and they transfer in year two, like you can get some money back. And so I think the insurance side is really interesting, as like the amount of money coming to the ecosystem is really high. Schools naturally will sort of need to have insurance coverage in place. So those are some things we're seeing sort of directly related to, I would say, the core sports side of things. One of the other things I would say that's been a big benefit from just like the NIL world is like athletes and have really become their own influencers and really their own brands. And so, there's a whole set of sort of software businesses around that space. We've backed a startup that's still in stealth that works with brands to connect them with influencers, and they're starting to do a lot more work in the college sports space. We're seeing college athletes that are effectively becoming their own media personalities and launching consumer brands. And so we've started investing in some of those types of categories as well.
Yeah, I've seen, you wrote an awesome thought piece, essay on the creator economy and different models for participating, investing in it,
Yeah.
along with creators. I thought that was
Yeah.
incredible. Um, is it fair to say that now that athletes are this new segment of the creator economy,
Yeah.
it's an opportunity for startups to look at them and say, this is something that's growing, and this is an underserved portion of that larger ecosystem,
Yeah.
or larger addressable market,
Yeah.
and this is where I hyper focus and wedge in, and then it can become a venture backed opportunity if this is something that actually serves the greater creator economy. Or do you look at it as something is big enough with college athletes in a vacuum?
Yeah. I think like the college athletes, I view like if you're looking just like on the branding side of it and like more on like the influencer side of it, I view them as a subset of the broader creator economy.
Yeah,
You look at someone like Livy Dunn and like her sort of
yeah,
following and like what that's become. Um, she's very much like a creator and influencer now, as much as she is an athlete and like someone that's extremely talented in her sport. So I think that's a little bit separate. And I think as like, I would sort of almost bucket that as like, we invest not only in sports, but also in the creator economy. I almost view that more as a creator economy investment. I think the sports sort of the college sports types investments that we would do as a firm are more sort of on the insurance and software sort of categories that I've sort of already mentioned. Um, where I think it's really interesting is like there are a few sort of like more back office type businesses that will happen, like payroll processing, health insurance processing, things like that, that
yeah,
um, will sort of be needed as like this $20.5 million starts flowing into uh, you know effectively employees, whether they're called employees or not.
yeah.
Um, around the US, and so I think there's going to be a lot of like more traditional businesses being started there as well.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a similar question for me is, whether you're looking at college sports from, we'll call it like B2C is things that serve the athlete
Yeah.
versus B2B things that serve the department.
Yeah.
New opportunities and new needs are arising. I don't know that like SaaS models hyper focused on athletic departments is the biggest market
No,
ever, right? So
no.
how do you think about
Yeah.
that? And are you seeing athletic departments spend money? And on one hand, I would say they're spending so much money. Look at all the things they're doing. They're trying to compete. But on the other hand, I would say they're also like super budget constrained all of a
Yeah.
sudden. So like,
Yeah.
what are you seeing there, and how do you think about these things as venture investment
Yeah,
opportunities?
definitely. So I'll answer your second question first, which is I think athletic departments are spending where they need to,
Yeah,
but they're not the best customers,
yeah,
right? Like they're not going to spend a ton of money or be really high ACV contracts, but there are a lot of them. So like the number of potential customers is definitely high, and there's been some like pretty scaled businesses like Teamworks, for example, that
yeah,
has made a lot of their money selling into college
yep,
athletic departments. Um, the way that I would think about it as a venture investor is like, you can sell into college athletic departments and administrators and athletes, but like that can't be your only segment, and you've got to sort of do
yeah,
do things beyond that ecosystem, right? So, um, Players Health, which I mentioned earlier, is a great example of this. They're not only servicing the college industry, like they're working with youth sports and amateur sports, and they're now starting to work with professional sports leagues. And so they're covering the entire sort of sporting journey, right? From when you first start playing little league to when you're, potentially playing in the MLB. Like, yeah, and that's their goal, right? Is to be able to have insurance products sort of across the ecosystem.
yep,
Another one of our portfolio companies is a company called Jump, co-founded by Jordy Leiser, Mark Laurie, and Alex Rodriguez, and it's a new ticketing startup. And so, they've done deals in the NWSL. They signed with the Minnesota Timberwolves and launched with them earlier this year. But they're exploring, potential partnerships with colleges as well down the line. And ticketing is a great, it's something that college athletic departments need, but it's also something that professional organizations need. So I view it as a little bit like that, where can you solve the problems that college athletic departments are facing, but can you also sort of expand beyond just selling into colleges as well?
cool. Do you want to talk a bit about that creator piece that you wrote? Because I think, we did a little bit of like, um,
Yeah.
doom and gloom on
Yeah.
this podcast, but I don't think that's how we feel. It's like there are problems and there is a unified path forward for addressing them.
Yeah.
It will get better, and college sports are
It
not
has
going
to.
anywhere.
Yeah.
I think an exciting conversation to have is it's never been a better time in most of the ways to be a college athlete. The opportunities you have, you're dealing with a lot
Totally.
of BS, but the opportunities you have to build your personal brand, to make money in that small window when most of us don't play professional sports, is great. And you guys put out an awesome piece on the creator economy that I think is relevant to a college athlete who's listening to this that says, I want to grow my brand.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you dig in on that a bit. I thought that was really bright.
Yeah. Yeah. So I co-wrote this with my colleague Aaron Miller at Will Ventures. It's really interesting. I think like the barriers to entry to becoming like an amazing YouTube creator today, or an influencer, whatever you call it, are like the barriers are extremely low, right? You can get started and you can grow organically. You take someone like Mr. Beast, he's for as, big of a business as he's built, multi-$100 million business, raising capital at a multi-billion-dollar valuation. He started, less than a decade ago. It's like it's insane to see his growth. And there's a bunch of other stories like that as well. And I think what's amazing is like when I look at the way that young fans are engaging with media and like their idols today, it's changed a lot where like a lot of their favorite sort of celebrities are YouTubers, right? And so, there's a YouTuber by the name of Jesser, for example, who's a big sports creator, one of the fastest growing sports creators on the platform. And Aaron, actually, my colleague, his cousins are like massive Jesser fans. So much so, like I would argue Jesser's probably a bigger celebrity for them than certain NBA players are. Yeah. And so you can even make the argument that someone like Jesser is a professional athlete because he does, all of his content is sort of sports focused. And so the opportunity is like really limitless if you're an athlete today in college, or even if you're a high school athlete, and you don't really play well in college or make it to the pros to create a business around you. Look at what Destroying has done. Like D's another great example of this where, he had his challenges. He was one of the first sort of casualties of the NIL era. And obviously he's a very talented athlete. He's a professional athlete, even today. But I would say the average kid knows him for his YouTube channel and for the business he's built there, more so than his playing career. And I think what's really awesome is like, there's the media side of the business, but once you actually sort of create the media side and have like the platform to sort of to build off of, you can monetize that through a bunch of different ways, right? So like take Mr. Beast as an example. He's making way more money from Feastables than he is from his actual content, right?
Yeah.
He's launched an Amazon Prime show. He's starting to do a lot more work in technology. He's starting to do live events. He's got merchandise. And so you kind of get like a media company similar to Disney, which has, theme parks and streaming services and, feature length films and TV shows. The same way Disney has like their flywheel, a lot of these sort of creators do as well. And it's something that athletes and college athletes can do as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like the Libby Dunn's the example. We'll see how big she goes. I don't think her moment is anywhere near done.
And the ambition really matters here, right? Like I think Mr. Beast has done an awesome job. Like he's had really like strong ambitions to build like a massive business, right? For other creators, like that's just like not their focus. Like they want to have a great business for themselves, and they don't want to burn themselves out, and like they don't want to get too big. And so it just sort of depends on what you're looking for. Again, Libby's a great example of this. She can sort of take it wherever she wants, probably, right? She could really scale things up and launch more brands and do more in sports around sort of the following that she's been able to gain. Or she could sort of decide to just sort of like keep things a little bit more.
The verticals that you guys invest in at Will Ventures are sports.
Yeah, so I would say it's expanding, right?
Yeah.
I think when the firm first started out, when Brian and Isaiah started Will Ventures back in late 2019, early 2020, a lot of our initial investments were in the sports category. as we've grown the team and we've sort of raised more capital, I would say that the core things we focus on are sports, entertainment, and consumer. And then specifically within consumer, it's consumer brands and like CPG, and then a lot around the consumer health and wellness space as well.
Gotcha. What else are you seeing that's interesting? I know you wrote another piece on how is AI actually
Yeah,
impacting the sports
yeah.
industry. I don't know if you want to talk about that, or if there's anything else that you're like diving deep into.
Yeah, so we're like a very research focused firm, and so there's honestly at any given time a bunch of different things that we're noodling on. And I think for each of those categories that we look at, right, like sports, entertainment, and consumer, there's like different trends. So maybe I'll just touch on one for each of them. So for sports, yeah, we talked about the impact of AI in sports. I think we're starting to see that I think that there's a lot out there on like how AI is changing industries, and some of it's real and some of it's not. I think sports is like no different, where it feels like people have been talking about it for a while. The same thing kind of happened with AR and VR, and nothing really materialized. Um, in sports, a couple things that I think are really interesting. So ticketing, I mentioned the company Jump that we backed previously, but I think like the ticketing industry has sort of been very stagnant for the last several decades, and so the ability for teams to sort of own that ticketing relationship with their fans more directly, I think is really interesting, and Jump enables that. I think there's some really interesting businesses on the translation side of things that are AI
Yeah.
driven. As leagues, look to be more global. The NBA is already very global. The NFL, I think I saw today, is adding even more international games. That league, which has historically been very North American focused, is going more global. Like language matters a lot, and I think AI has a really strong use case around being able to translate. There's a company called LingoPal that's done pretty well in that sector. Sponsorship is another one where I think AI is starting to be used in sports. I think I'm a little more lukewarm on those applications. So that's one thing sort of in the sports sector. Media entertainment actually is really interesting. So at Will Ventures, we do a lot of work not just in the U.S. but internationally as well. And I just spent a week in India, and it was awesome. I think India is a market maybe a little bit less developed on the sports side, but very developed on the media and entertainment side. Bollywood has been like a massive industry there. And the way that I think users are engaging with content in India has like changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's gone from these like, very long Bollywood movies. Like I grew up watching Bollywood films. They can be, 3 to 4 hours sometimes. Now that's that's completely shifting into a lot more short form content. So you're seeing YouTube really taking off there. You're seeing these like short form micro drama apps that are doing really, really well. And so I think globally that trend is happening, a move away from long form entertainment into short and medium form content. So I think that's really interesting. And then on the consumer side, I think, there's a ton of things that we're covering there. One thing that my colleagues Aaron and Brian recently went deep on is the longevity space. And, I think just the amount of money that people are spending on their health and wellness, whether it's wearables, whether it's DEXA scans, whether it's like at-home blood tests. I think it's really interesting. I think right now it's a little bit more limited in terms of the types of people that are spending money on this. It's a small portion of the population, but we think at Will Ventures that's going to just continue to grow, right? And then we think if you can create a closed loop where not only are you doing some of these testing things like blood tests and at-home care, but you're building community around these things. Maybe you're tracking things through your wearables. Maybe you have sort of an in-person experience. Like if you can create like a full flywheel around your consumer health experience and around your longevity experience, we think that's really interesting.
Is anybody doing that well?
Yeah. So we're looking at a couple investments in the space. Nothing that we can announce yet, but
Okay.
there are some really awesome entrepreneurs that are building in this category. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think there's a lot of money flowing into the ecosystem, and I think we have a very strong point of view that you need to like have the physical and the digital elements sort of converge.
Yeah.
Because if you just have the digital, you're not going to get that same level of engagement and retentiveness.
Yeah.
And if you just have that physical, you're not going to get that same level of scale, right? And so you need to have both, and it's really hard to do, by the way. But there's a couple things that hopefully we'll be able to announce in the near future that I think you'll find pretty interesting.
That makes sense to me. We had a investment that was crushing it, really nailing a, physical wellness regiment.
Yeah.
And then it just became a really competitive market.
Yeah, definitely.
And unfortunately did not scale to the way that we thought it was going to. The thing that they were rushing to do was create a cohesive closed loop with a digital system.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting that you point that out. Yeah.
Which, by the way, like taking off my investor hat for a second and just like on the human side, I think like in person, like we've as a society become very digitally focused. AI has made that even, like 10 times more, right? Like now, even if you call like a customer service representative, that might be an AI voice on the other side of it, right? So
Right.
you're losing these like small human interactions. And I think as a firm, and I definitely, I don't want to speak for everyone at the firm, but myself personally, I think like there will be a premium on in-life experiences.
Totally.
You see that in health and wellness. I think you'll see that in sports, which is why I'm so bullish on the sports industry overall. But I think like tech is great. I mean, obviously we're tech investors. We love scale and we love backing like software businesses. But I think like fundamentally as humans, we need that like in-person connection. And so, I mean, going back to this conversation around college sports, like that's what I love about college sports, right? Is like it is a built-in community.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that like if you and I were just meeting and you knew that I went to USC and I knew that you went to Duke, we could have a conversation.
Yeah.
Like we like, I could
It's
probably
part
talk
of
to
the
you for 2
fabric
hours.
of America.
Totally.
We
And
gotta
we need
save
that.
it.
We need that.
We need that.
And without it, I feel like, like what are we doing?
Yeah, we'll save it. We'll definitely save it. There's no way this
Carl
is going by the
Bloom will
wayside.
save it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. Dude, I really appreciate you coming.
Thanks for having me, man.
You came prepared. Everything you said was enlightening. Really appreciate you making
Yeah,
time
of course.
to get over here to Slam headquarters in LIC.
Thanks for having me.